Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Bikes or Death podcast. This is the podcast that talks about bike packing, cycling, adventuring, and really all things outdoors. I am not your normal host. I am not Patrick. My name is Ryan, and we are going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm actually going to interview Patrick. So this is an idea that we kind of had percolating for some time, I guess. We kind of talked about interviewing you on your own show, kind of as a way for your listeners to get to know you a little bit, get to know where you are coming from, kind of some personal history of you. You know, people kind of generally want to know that kind of stuff. And I guess it just kind of worked out serendipitously that you just had your show featured on bikepacking.com. So congratulations on that, by the way. That's really fantastic. I'm really happy for you. And so I guess this interview will somewhat kind of piggyback off of that article that was featured. There was a handful of questions that were asked there, and so we might dive a little bit deeper into some of those.
Cool.
Give your listeners an opportunity to, again, know a little bit more about you. We'll just kind of see how this goes. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, the timing worked out pretty well because we had planned on doing this show on this day. I had no idea when the bikepacking.com article was going to come out, and it dropped on Tuesday, and we're here on Sunday, and we're going to talk. So I think as much as it makes me uncomfortable to kind of be the center of attention, I do see the value in letting people know a little bit more about me.
Sure.
And actually, you were the one to point out, it's like, I'm not famous. I haven't done, you can't go online and Google Patrick Farnsworth and find like tons of information about me. So I think there is value in telling a little bit more about my story. So happy to do it.
Yeah, good. Well, what do you think? Just jump into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, let's just start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself. I mean, aside from cycling, just tell us who Patrick Farnsworth is and what we're doing here, what you're doing here.
I think I'm like a normal guy, right? Like I'm a wife, 2 kids, live in a single family home, have a regular job. I like to ride bikes and I like to go on adventures. I like to be outside. And that's one thing that I've learned about myself through the course of my life is that being outside is a requirement for me. And riding a bike is my favorite way to do that. So, we're supposed to be talking less about bikes and more about me. But the truth is that like bikes do encompass so much of my life at this point, and outdoors and all those things. So, for me, my family obviously comes first. I have a job that I work hard at to provide for my family, and I'm fortunate enough I'm self-employed, and that allows me to kind of make my own schedule. It's a weird life that I live where it could be a Tuesday. My wife and I are both self-employed, I should say that. It could be a Tuesday and we look at each other and we're like, what's your schedule look like? It's pretty open. What does your look like? Man, I got a couple days off.
Yeah.
Let's go do something, and so
that's great.
Yeah. Our life is like that, and it's weird, and it is great, but it's also kind of weird and stressful in different ways, It's kind of nice to always have a plan and, okay, well, we're going to be off for the summer. We're going to have spring break off. So let's, plan this in advance. A lot of the times we'll just, it's always impromptu stuff.
Yeah.
And state parks are booked, or we don't know what we're doing, so we're scrambling last minute to make things happen. And it's always great. We make the best of it. But that's kind of what my life is like. I just it's always a new adventure. Every single week is something new. Like we just got back from a family camping trip this weekend. We went to Lake Whitney State Park in Texas. It was a family trip, so we took both girls and had a great time. And then we're going to put in, I think, 3 days of work. And then my wife and I are headed to Northwest Arkansas to visit. We just closed on some land up there. So we're going to go check out our new property and kind of spend some time up there. And then we'll come back and work like hell and do it all over again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I can see how like you were saying, they might kind of add some stressors, not really knowing what your routine might be. But I think at the same time, you're not a slave to a routine. You're not, a slave to that 9 to 5 where you're sure of your schedule and when you're going to be working, but all that time you can't be doing other things that you really want to be doing. So yeah. I'm sure there's trade-offs, but at the same time, a lot of people can't just kind of up and go and do fun stuff whenever they want to. So yeah, that's really neat.
And in truth, I think that my life, I've created this life, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Whether ADD or ADHD is a real thing or not, I have that. Whatever that thing is, yeah. I have it. And so that's just the way my life works out. Like I've kind of created this life where, because of the way that my brain works, I can just go and do whenever I need to. Like I can work like hell and get a lot of stuff done. And then if I'm feeling burnt out, I can take a trip and go let the steam out and get reset and come back and do it again. So it's good. For me, it's good. And I've come to accept the fact that this is just the way I am and I'm not going to change. And so I might as well just like embrace it and roll with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that. Again, I mean, I don't think a lot of people get to experience that, or get to live that way, I guess, whether they want to or not, I guess. But
no, true. I do feel fortunate for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So let's get into your history with cycling a little bit, if you don't mind. So, so tell us a little bit about your history with cycling. When did you first start riding bikes?
4 years old.
4 years old?
Yep. I have a fun story about this real quick.
Okay, yeah, please do.
So I was at the bike park probably about a month ago with my daughter. We ride up the street and go to a local bike park, and there was a kid there on a BMX bike, and I had my full suspension Salsa, Pony Wrestler, and he was like, "Man, that's a cool bike. Are you good?
Are you good?
Am I good?" I'm like, and I sat there and thought about it. I'm like, I don't know. Am I good? I was like, all right, well, I started walking at 2, started riding at 4. So I guess at this point, I'm about as good at riding my bike as I am at walking.
Yeah,
that's it's like I don't know any way. Like, how good are you at walking?
Yeah,
like it's basically the same
I don't
question.
fall that often, so when I walk, so I guess I'm pretty good.
It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
but yeah, my dad. I still remember my dad teaching me how to ride. I remember it vividly. It was a very important moment in my life. I have very, very few memories from my childhood, and almost all the ones that I have are either associated with riding bikes or my brother getting injured, which he did a lot. But both of those always gave me great pleasure, and so I remember them.
Yeah. Your brother getting injured on bikes?
Yeah, I could. Well, I'll tell that story real quick. Why not? We'll go on a tangent.
Yeah, I do.
So one time, sorry, Michael, this is going to happen. So my brother is 2 years younger than me, and we were always riding bikes and hanging out, and I mean, it's what you do, like we were always together. And so being the other older brother, I was setting the example, and we were riding around the block, and I was in front of him, and I was riding with no hands and no feet, so my arms and legs were out.
Yeah.
And I told my brother, I'm like, "Hey, Michael, no hands, no feet, no eyes." He didn't know that I didn't have my eyes closed because he was behind me. So he did it. And then I watched him just kind of, we weren't going that fast, but just, kind of careen into a curb, go over the bars, head first, and hit a jagged curb. Oh. And he was bleeding, and I'm like, "Hey, how are you doing, Michael?" He's like, "Who am I? Where am I? What?" Ooh. He was concussed, so he was, and luckily a car came by, I flagged him down. He took me to our parents' house, and anyway, he was fine so far. I mean, long-term effects we don't know yet, but yeah.
So, having started riding bikes so young, you said at the age of 4, how do you feel like that's influenced you now and your cycling habits and who you are as a cyclist now? How do you feel like that's influenced you?
That's a tough one. I don't think I can separate the two. I mean, my childhood, looking back on it now, was fantastic. I grew up in the glorious 80s where, we lived in a great spot. We lived in a neighborhood, but we had a creek in our backyard and there was a green space. And so we built bike trails and forts, and in my front yard, we built a berm and dirt ramps. And then we would go around, go down the street, and we had like, the concrete culverts were like water irrigation culverts. Yeah. We'd ride our bikes on those. I've kind of, as time has gone on and I've gotten older, I think I've realized that bike packing and riding bikes is simply an extension of my childhood. Yeah. Like when I ride my bike and I'm just free and enjoying it to the fullest, I'm remembering who I was as an 8-year-old kid riding through the neighborhood, or riding in my backyard, or jumping off rickety ramps that my brother and I built in our backyard, or whatever it was, So like, it's, as far as I can tell, it's had a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really something special to have those kind of formative experiences, and then to have it be something like a bike, riding bikes, that has stuck with you for so long. There's probably a lot of people now that didn't have that same opportunity, to have those kind of formative experiences. Yeah. So that's really cool to be able to, recognize that now as an adult and kind of unpack that and look back and say, this is kind of where I've come, in my bike riding and my recreation, and it's kind of formed, how I ride bikes and how I live my life today.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I need to send my mom a thank you letter.
Yeah, hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Mom.
Yeah, give your mom a call, tell them thanks. Yeah.
No, for real. I mean, I'm very grateful for my childhood. You don't realize it when you're in it, but like you said, growing up now, my kids will not experience the same type of environment that I experienced. Yeah. I mean, we were free to roam the town on our bikes and go exploring and have adventures. And my mom didn't want to hear from us until it was time for dinner. She didn't want to see us. If we came home, go to the bathroom in the backyard, kick us out. I mean, my mom was hardcore about it. Yeah. And I didn't realize the value in that until later in life. And it's been everything. I mean, really, like, I can't replace that experience, like it really had a huge impact on my life. And even to this day, it's huge. And so I feel very lucky.
Yeah. You and I have had this conversation a number of times, just, while we're hanging out and having our conversations. And, I think you and I definitely grew up in kind of a different time. Kids are experiencing just growing up a lot differently than we did, and then generations before us as well. And there's a lot of reasons for that we don't have to necessarily get into now. But I on my level, or I guess in my experience, I can remember my dad taking me to Home Depot like on the Saturday morning and buying like cinder blocks and plywood and some lumber, and like taking me home, and we get in the garage, and he's gets his miter saw out, and he's like cutting up the wood for me. He's like, all right, here's your tools, like build a ramp, like build something, whatever you want. I'm going inside to take a nap. Like here's here's your materials, like build a ramp, and don't come in the house unless there's a lot of blood. So that's kind of what he used to tell us, kind of jokingly.
He would say that?
Oh yeah. He'd be like, don't come inside unless,
he sounds like my mom.
Yeah, he's like, unless there's a lot of blood or something. And there, of course we got bumps and bruises and got scraped and all kinds of fun stuff. But
oh man, that was so many.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really valuable, or those kind of experiences were really valuable for me growing up. Yeah.
Dude, okay, so since we're talking about this, I'll hit it one more time. I cannot tell you the number of times that I went home with skin knees or hands, because I ate shit. And I mean, I was bleeding everywhere. And my mom looks at me. My mom is a former nurse, so she's competent. She looks at me. She's like, "You're fine. Go take care of yourself in the bathroom." Yeah. When my brother came home with a concussion, she was a little more engaged and ready to help him out. But like, at the time, I remember like feeling I don't know if hurt is the right word, but just like, I felt like my world was going to end. I was in so much pain. And my mom was like, "You're fine. Go shake it off," you know? And like, at the time that was hard, but now again, thank you, Mom. Like that's helpful. Like your dad just sending you to do it is helpful, because the only way you learn is if you get the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And as parents, like, we live in a world where, man, you're just not given that opportunity enough. And so I know, again, you know, you and I have talked about this a lot, and you got to let your kids live life. You got to let them fall. You got to let them get hurt. You don't want them to get really hurt, right. But you know, there's value in learning to fall and get back up and keep going. It's simple, but there's a lot of value there.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where everybody wants to protect everybody from that. But I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't have those experiences, you know? Yeah. And I don't know the extent to which they've impacted my life, but I feel like they've been meaningful. Yeah. To whatever, you know, whatever extent, I don't know, but I feel like they're important. So they must be.
Yeah. So when would you say that you got serious about riding bikes? And so I choose the word serious on purpose because I feel like with, you know, most quote unquote cyclists, you know, a lot of us grew up riding bikes like we've been talking about. And I feel like there kind of comes a time when you're like, okay, I'm not just a kid like riding my bike anymore. You know, I'm going to like buy like a nice bike, and I'm going to be like a mountain biker, or I'm going to be like a road cyclist. Or, you know, maybe I'm wrong in that, but in me, that was my experience. Like, okay, I'm going to go like buy a nice bike.
No, you're 100% right.
And so like for you, when did you feel like you became a quote unquote serious cyclist?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's a really good question because, like, you know, my dad taught me how to ride, and it's what we did, right? We they gave us bikes. They kicked us out of the house. We went and rode bikes. Like, there weren't a lot of options for us. We could throw rocks at each other in the driveway, or we could go ride bikes or whatever. Also valuable. But so for me, my life kind of went from bikes, and I got like hardcore into BMX and tricks and all that kind of stuff. If you know Rad, if you've ever seen the movie Rad, I grew up when Rad was at his peak, right? And so that heavily influenced my life. And, you know, I wanted to be Crew Jones, and, you know, I mean, that was it, right? But then after that, I got into skateboarding, and I skateboarded. I consider myself a skateboarder from the age of 14 to 21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then, so I let the bike go at that point. I wish I never did, but I did, because I could have just taken BMX. But, you know, I live in a small town, and BMX and skateboard, like, none of those things are mainstream, you know? So there's like 3 people in town that are skateboarders, and I was like, okay, well, I'll go with this crew, you know? Yeah. And it was good. I mean, I loved those years of my life. So to answer your question, at the age of 19 is when, it was either 18 or 19, somewhere around there, I bought a rock hopper off of eBay. Nice. And then it came with a rigid front fork. So I went on eBay, and it's back when they had the skinny headset. I think it was like an inch stem.
Steel frame?
Steel frame, yeah. And put a RockShox something, I can't remember. Oh, man. Anyway, I built that bike up, you know, like I built it. I kind of just figured it out. And I don't even remember what inspired me to do that. Maybe it was just like my youth, like kind of coming back and being like, all right, you know, like, let's pick this back up. But yeah, I built that bike, and it was a total piece of shit. I loved it to death. I rode the wheels off of it. And around that time period, probably about a year in, around the age of 2021, I started doing some racing, and I was terrible. Like, I showed up for these races, and I was wearing cotton shirts with cut off, like my arm sleeves cut off, and I was wearing like baggy shorts. And I mean, my bike was a complete piece of shit, and all these people were in Lycra and, you know, the high-end bikes and everything. But God, what a great, I just had fun, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then I was like, okay, there's another level out there. Like, I started racing. I was like, because you just ride your home trails, and you're like, I'm pretty good at these home trails, and you think you're pretty good, and then you go to a race, and you're like, okay, there's more. There's another level out there, and I'm not there yet. And so, yeah, probably around then. That's definitely when I started to like really want to become a bike rider, racer. Probably at that time I wanted to be a racer. I wanted to race mountain bikes, and I wanted to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did it progress from there? Where did you start, like dedicating more time to riding and looking for nicer bikes? How did it kind of, go forward from there?
Exactly. Yeah. My next bike after that was a carbon Cannondale CAD 3.
Oh, wow. You jumped up.
Yeah. And I took a lot of the parts off my Rock Shocks and I swapped them over to my Cannondale, and it was still like a Franken bike. It's just something I put together, and the internet wasn't quite as informative as it is now. So of course we had the internet. It was like 2001. And so you can find some information online. eBay was huge. And so I spent a lot of time just on eBay looking for parts that look cool, and okay, well, this fit with that and that fit with that. And, but more than anything for me, like I enjoyed the process of building my own bikes. But more than anything, I just enjoyed riding, mountain biking, going out on the trails. In our town at that time, we only had one trail system, 13 miles at Lake Bryan.
Yeah.
And I've been riding it forever. I know everything about it still to this day. I mean, I could close my eyes and ride that trail.
Were you riding alone? Were you finding other people to ride with? Kind of getting into like the social aspect of mountain biking.
I rode alone for probably 6 to 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Before I even reached out to like our local club.
Was that because of like lack of confidence, or just you wanted to be alone? Or?
It's probably a combination. Yeah, definitely a combination of lack of confidence. And I'm a little bit of an introvert. Like I'm outgoing to an extent, but my time on a bike has always been a time of solitude and a time of enjoyment and reflection and all those things for me. And so like I never even really, I wasn't missing anything, like I was out on my bike and I was enjoying it. So I didn't seek anything else out. And then, about 6 or 7 years after that, I kind of reached out to the local club, and it was great. We have a great local club. It's not huge, but it's made up of great people, and they took me in. I remember the first day there, like people were singing and dancing. There was a new member, and they were excited.
We have 4 members.
We have like 4 members. That's great. I think there was like 7 or 8 that day. Yeah. But it was great. We went on a group ride, and we finished it up. We had some beers and watched the sunset over Lake Bryan, and it was good. And so continuing on like that journey, it was followed by probably 6 or 7 years of really being into the club. I was in I was a vice president of the club, and I got into the organization and wanted to help grow the club, and became very focused on our local bike scene and trying to grow the bike community and all those kinds of things. Yeah.
So somewhere in there you got into road cycling a little bit too, didn't you?
Yes.
When did that kind of
peer
happen?
pressure
when did that come about?
Oh, that was short-lived. Yeah. So I want to say that was probably about 5 years ago. And okay, so I kind of fell off of the racing scene for a while and was just enjoying riding, group rides, the bicycle community, trail work, that kind of stuff. And I felt like as my confidence grew, maybe I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back out there. I'm ready to do some racing again. And so I got into that, right? I was tracking all my data, and I was reading all the blogs and the forums and the YouTube videos and everything else. And one thing that everybody said, even my local bike shop, I mean, everybody, right? I mean, whether it's guys you're riding with at the club or whatever, you gotta, you train on your road bike for endurance and cardio, and you train on your mountain bike for skills. But primarily most of your training is on a road bike.
Yeah.
So I bought my road bike, and I was training to do these 100-mile events, and that was just like training for me to be better on my mountain bike, because I wanted to race my mountain bike. But there's a couple of things that I learned pretty quickly. One, I'm not very fast. Like, I mean, I really did try, but I'm not fast. Like, and maybe that's because it's not that much fun for me, you know? And no knocking people that enjoy it, because I think it's great. There's a great community. It's fun. I get it. But it just didn't hit home for me the way other things have.
Yeah. I think I had a very similar experience to yours, in that when I started getting really serious about mountain biking, you know, like you said, you hear the local bike shop and all the groups saying, you know, we got to get a road bike, and you got to go on these long endurance, you know, interval rides and all these things to be a better mountain biker. And I followed a very similar path as you. I went and bought a pretty decent giant road bike and did that for maybe a year or so. And for me personally, I just wasn't enjoying riding a road bike. And
that's right. You and I went on one road ride. I remember that. We did 17 miles that day.
Yeah. And I just, again, you know, personally, I just wasn't enjoying that type of cycling. I mean, I love being on a bike, but I just wasn't enjoying it that much. And so I was like, well, I would much rather be riding my mountain bike. And I get that, like, this is supposed to make me a better mountain bike rider, but I enjoy riding my mountain bike more. So I'm just going to go ride my mountain bike more.
It makes sense. I mean, if you're not trying to be a racer, if you're not trying to be an elite athlete, then why? Just go have fun. Yeah. Like, who cares? Who cares if you're fast? Just go and ride your bike and have a good time. Yeah. You know? Yeah. You're going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So no, we both went there, and it was fun. Like, I did some really neat things on my road bike that were fun, and I have good memories from it.
So tell us about kind of when and how you got into bike packing. You know, when was it introduced to you? What was kind of your progression into that side of the sport?
Yeah. Man, it's a weird thing. So I live in, as I mentioned, a small town, College Station, Texas, and we don't have like great mountain bike trails or big mountains or great camping destinations. Like, you know, we just don't. Like, I'm not knocking the town, but that's just a fact. Yeah. And for whatever reason, in this little town, we have some really badass bike packers. Jose Bermudez has done Trans Am, Tour Divide. He just finished Iditarod, and more. He's done a lot, and he's also a cycling coach. We have Billy Rice. He was the first person ever to yo-yo the Tour Divide, and then the year after that, he yo-yoed the Tour Divide with his daughter on the second leg of the yo-yo. They rode a tandem bicycle, and, you know, they yo-yoed it. And then I could go on and on. The point is, like, for whatever reason, we have some legitimate athletes / bike packers in our community. Yeah. And it was just it was a perfect storm thing where people I knew started to get into the sport. And so curiosity, obviously, I started to follow what they were doing. And as a person who grew up camping and riding bikes and has a huge love and admiration for the outdoors, it really piqued my interest, you know. And you can imagine that I've been riding bikes for a long time, right? So it's always fun to find some new creative way to ride your bike. Sure. And so all those things were happening, and at the same time, Inspired to Ride came out, which every bike packer knows probably. Yeah. And so I watched that 1 million times and learned everything about every single one of those participants and what they were riding and all their gear and the route that they took and, you know, everything. And then not too long after that, Billy Rice, who I mentioned, created a bike packing event here that starts and ends in College Station, Texas. So that's the Grand Gravel 500, and it's it's very simple. It's a 500-mile self-supported bike packing event, mostly on gravel. You start in College Station. Then you get into the Sam Houston National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you go up through the Davy Crockett National Forest. You hit Palestine, which is basically the halfway point. You turn around, you're back in the Davy Crockett National Forest on different roads, and then back in the Sam Houston on different roads, and then back to College Station.
So it's a loop.
Yeah, it's a figure eight.
Oh, really?
It's actually a figure eight. If you look at it on a map, it's an 8. So, so yeah, it was a perfect storm, and it was one of those things that when something clicks, it clicks. Mm-hmm. And for all the reasons, everything in my life, all the biking and all the camping and all the passion for outdoors, all came together, and I was like, holy shit, this is something that I really need to do. I mean, I have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I had a very similar introduction and experience with bike packing. And I think that's really just what makes the activity or sport, if you will, just so intriguing to so many people like you and I is, you have avid outdoorsmen who love to, camp and hike and ride their bikes and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, holy crap, like I can do all of this kind of in one go on my bike. Like what? Okay,
what?
So it's kind of like this, this oh shit moment where it's like, you can do that.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of how it happened with me was, I didn't even know what bike packing was. And the first bike packing trip I went on, I was working in a state park, and I just put like my backpacking pack on my back for like 2 nights and just rode my bike out to a campsite and just camped. Yeah. And I didn't even think anything of it. And then I remember seeing stuff like Inspired to Ride and other, stuff online, and people have all these cool bags on their bikes. And I'm like, holy shit. Like
this is a thing.
Like this is a real thing that people do. And I remember being super intrigued by it. So it's kind of it was very explosive. Like when I first kind of learned about it.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
If you have a passion for outdoors and bikes, and you find out about bike packing.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I've learned hosting this show. I get a lot of messages from people who are just being introduced to bike packing, just like you and I were.
Yeah.
And it's exciting.
Yeah.
They're like, holy shit, how do I do this? I want to go.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is important. Threw a backpack on my back and I went out for a ride.
Yeah.
Like it's great that there's all these bags, and I love mine, but you don't always need it. You just need a sense of adventure, a love for the outdoors, and a love for riding bikes, and go get you some.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know until probably 5 years later that I bike packed.
Yeah. You were a bike packer and you didn't even know it.
I was just like, I'm going to go camping, and I like riding my bike, so it's going to get me there a little faster, and I'll just try that. You know, and I didn't even think anything of it. So
yeah, it's cool.
So was the Grand Gravel 500, that was your first main bike packing? Was that your first event, or your first big experience bike packing, or did you have previous experiences before that?
I had some good experiences before that, going into that for sure. I mean, the first time I ever went bike packing was with my wife, Carrie, and I like this story now. At the time, I didn't really think anything of it, but now knowing what I know, it's kind of cool. So we live, like I said, pretty close to Sam Houston National Forest, and I got on a ride with GPS, and I figured out a route from my house to the Sam Houston National Forest, and the idea was that my wife and I would ride there, camp, and ride back. And I think it was about 55 or 60 miles to get there. And the part that I like about this story now is that I was riding my carbon fiber road bike.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I put a saddlebag on it. I got the Salsa anything cradle, the front, I don't even know what it is, the thing that goes on the front handlebars that holds a roll, and I had a backpack on, and she was riding her giant Lust Advanced 2 carbon fiber full suspension mountain bike. I mean, you can't get any different than that.
Yeah.
And we just took what we had and we rode our bikes to Sam Houston National Forest, and we camped, we rode home. That's it.
Very simple. Yeah.
Very simple. And we were probably, and I said this in the bikepacking.com article, we were probably on the worst possible bikes for this adventure. Like gravel. Well, okay, so part of it was pavement. So you got a full suspension bike on pavement. Then you got my bike, which was a gravel bike with 28C tires on gravel. And it was, I remember my wife was like, dude, how are you even staying up? I was bouncing all around. And I mean, I was just getting jittered and jattered and, going all around. And I was having a good time. I didn't care. I was riding my bike and I was having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my first ever experience. And then, it was a great experience. And after that, I mean, sitting here right now, I can't tell you every single one that I've gone on prior to the 500, but there was probably 5 or 6 different rides similar to that, at some point. I think after that ride, that was kind of like the test. I went on that ride. I had some bags. I had an idea that this was going to be something that I really wanted to do, but I'm a practical guy, so I tested it with what I had. I was like, all right, I'm ready. I'm ready to step up and buy a bike for bike packing. And so that's, I bought a used Salsa Fargo. It's a 2011, 2012 Salsa Fargo. Bought it for $950. Fucking love that bike. Yeah. It's the bike I ride right now. I'm never going to get rid of that bike. It's my bike. It's Felina. Yeah. And I just, from there, I just did what everybody else does. I got my bike, and the same way when I was 19 years old, I started building it up to what I want it to be. I started to put the parts on it I want. I tried different things. I've gone from drop bars with air. I've gone from the wood chippers with aero bars to now I'm riding Jones bars and different configurations. I've gone from a carbon fork to a steel front fork, and it's all just fun. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about bike packing is that there's not one right way to do it. If you're a triathlete, there's it's all about aerodynamics and weight. That's all it is, and bike packing is not that way. If you're going to go and ride your bike for 500 miles or more or less, you need to be comfortable. You need to be able to carry a lot of weight. And I guess that's it. And have fun. But if you're comfortable and you're going somewhere great, you're going to have fun. Yeah.
So what would you say has been your most challenging trip? Would you say it would be the Grand Gravel, or do you have another trip that was maybe more challenging than that? And I guess challenging in any sense of the word. I mean, just the physical difficulty, maybe mental difficulty.
Yeah. The Grand Gravel was hard. It pushed me. It pushed me as far as I've ever been pushed, I think. There's only 2 experiences that I think pushed me that way. One was the Grand Gravel. And then the second was a trip that Carrie and I took that same summer. So we did the Grand Gravel in March, and then we went to Colorado in June, and it was a different kind of suffering, but it was also very hard. Yeah. So
I think a lot of listeners probably have a good idea of what the Grand Gravel is just from you talking about it before and some of your guests on the show. But tell us about the Colorado trip that you're referring to.
Yeah, that was a great trip for me in a lot of ways, mostly from a learning standpoint. And that's important. That's another thing you have to keep in perspective is no trip is a failure if you're learning something from it. Yeah. And you're always learning. And so we're at 278 feet, 280 feet
here in College Station,
above sea,
maybe less, maybe 250 feet.
Yeah. We don't have any elevation here. We don't have hills. We don't have mountains. Yeah. We don't have elevation. So I had no idea what to expect. And for the listeners, this is kind of interesting. So my wife was going to a wedding in Eagle, Colorado, and Ryan, you had just moved from Eagle, Colorado,
I used to live there,
to College Station.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that coincidence. And so obviously, like, I was talking to you and I was like, okay, I've done 500 miles in Texas. Like, what can I reasonably expect to do in Colorado? Like, how does that transfer? I don't have any altitude training. I can't climb very well because I don't have experience doing it, and all these things. And like, yeah.
Do you remember what I told you?
No.
I think I told you to, whatever your mileage that you're planning on doing in a day, to cut it in half.
That's good advice.
Because I think you told me you were trying to do, like, what was it, like 90 miles a
100.
day? 100 miles a day. And I was like, and I knew the route you were doing because I had done the route that you guys did. And I was like, no. Patrick.
You were right.
Yeah.
You were more than right. Actually, you should have said cut it in like by 75%, like take 75% off of whatever you're trying to do. Yeah. So you had given me some information, and then there was a guy on Facebook who also like was from Eagle, Colorado, and I was bouncing ideas between both of y'all. So we had decided on it was basically about a 55, 60 mile route.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I remember doing that.
Yeah. And so going into that, the first night we drove from Texas, and then we stayed at 3,000 feet. Then we drove to the base of whatever mountain it was we climbed first.
Is Hardscrabble maybe?
No, it was another. Hardscrabble was second.
Okay.
I can't remember. We stayed at the Yowman campground. It was at 9,000 feet. And then the next morning we woke up, packed our bags and our bikes and bags, and climbed up to 11,000 feet, went down, had to climb back up.
This is in White River National Forest, by the way. And
okay. Yeah. Thank you.
That's clarification.
Right. Yeah. There's so many things that happen on that trip. The first day we climbed the first mountain pass, and never in my life have I climbed for 8 miles consecutively.
Yeah.
I've never done that. Yeah. I didn't know what that was like. I had to relearn how to ride my bike 8 miles consecutively up.
Yeah, not to mention those are like old Jeep roads, so it's not like
pavement.
It's not pavement.
It's not paved. It's rocky, it's rough, and gnarly, road, and washed out, and everything else, right? Yeah. But it was beautiful. Like I had to get into a place where just absorbing everything that's around you, live in the moment, like I'm going 2.7 miles an hour so I can see everything.
Yeah.
I can't breathe, but I can see everything. So I started to just focus on my scenery. We got up to the top of the first mountain. We had a nice lunch. We looked at the views, and then we had a nice 5 or 6 mile downhill descent that was phenomenal. We got to the bottom. We sat by a stream under a huge tree. I mean, a huge, beautiful tree. And we filled all of our water from the stream, and we were tired. Yeah. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon, and we were absolutely spent.
Yeah.
But we still had a good 12 to 14 miles to go that day. And so we started climbing mountain number 2. Yeah.
And that was Hardscrabble, right?
That was Hardscrabble.
Yeah.
And all I can tell you is that my wife was an absolute rock star on that second mountain. She was like a little billy goat, just climbing super steady. And I absolutely suffered. I probably walked more than I rode my bike. Like, I was in a really bad place, and I started to experience altitude sickness for the first time in my life.
Really? Coming
from 0 foot elevation, I haven't done much altitude. I haven't done any. I haven't done any altitude riding at this point. This point in my life, this is the first time in my life I've ever ridden a bike that weighed 50 pounds at elevation, going straight up for miles and miles and miles.
Yeah.
And it got to be weird. It got to be where I'm like, my body and my mind were experiencing things that they had never experienced before. And if you talk to any adventure athlete, anybody who does this kind of stuff, they're going to have moments where they're questioning, okay, is what's happening to me right now okay? Can I get over this? Or do I need to like call somebody?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's where I was. I was in that place where I'm like closely monitoring where I was mentally and physically.
Yeah.
And at some point, probably halfway up the mountain, I told Carrie, you know, of course I tried to suck it up and act like everything was fine. But at some point I just had to tell her, for safety reasons, we are in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
So she's my only other resource. And so I'm like, listen, here's the deal. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling. I still want to go, but you know, be aware that I'm kind of not in a great place right now. So we continued on like that. Eventually we did get to the top of Hardscrabble Mountain, and it took, I had scheduled us to be there at 2:00 in the afternoon. We were there right before the sun went down.
Yeah.
So we got there,
Which there in the summer is late.
Yeah, it was 7:30 or 8 or, you know, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was later in the day. So I had calculated food and water and energy and all those things for like a nice 5-hour trek up the mountain. And it turned into be a day-long journey. And we got into camp, and I was setting up the hammock and unpacking gear, and I felt like total shit. I just didn't know what to do. I never had exhaustion and altitude sickness. Like, this was all new for me. So I didn't know what to do. At some point, Carrie said to me, she was like, okay, there's less oxygen up here, so you should stop doing things. Like, you just need to stop. You need to get your heart rate down, and you need to stop sucking in air or keep sucking in air, but you know, not sucking in as much air. And so that's what I did. Like, I laid in a hammock from probably 8:00 that night until 2:00 in the morning, feeling absolutely terrible, feeling like the whole time maybe I should go back down the mountain.
Yeah.
You know, we knew where water was, we knew where we could camp, maybe just cruise on down the mountain. And that was a really interesting time in my life where I was really on the balance of like, what should I do right now?
Yeah.
And at 2:00 in the morning, it just stopped. Like, in an instant, I could snap my fingers and I felt fine. I felt good, you know? And I woke up so I went to sleep, finally woke up the next morning, felt amazing. And we rode down. It was, what is that downhill in Hardscrabble? It was like 16 miles downhill.
Yeah. I want to say, from the top back down, it's like 16 miles, just screaming downhill the whole way.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. I won't say so good. The first 5 miles or so, they call it Hardscrabble Mountain. It was like baby head rocks and just super gnarly, unmaintained.
The washboards are really bad up there
our
at the top.
Arms and our hands and our shoulders were screaming.
Yeah.
But then we hit this red dirt.
Yeah.
And it was windy and flowy, and we just, 30 miles an hour downhill all the way, and it was glorious.
Yeah.
And that's a payoff. There's a good lesson in there, right? It's like you put up with all that adversity, and at the end of if you put in the work, then you get the reward. And I'm not advocating that people put themselves in a danger, but I've put myself in enough positions where my body felt weird and I wasn't really sure, where I was like, I'm okay. I was borderline. I was literally borderline.
Yeah.
But I was okay.
Yeah, there's definitely a fine line between like the idea of pushing yourself and, pushing yourself to your limits and enduring and listening to your body and knowing when you need to stop, so it's kind of, it's interesting and it's kind of scary. And I think anybody who's done these type of trips or any kind of athletic feat similar, you find yourself in kind of those scenarios. And you definitely learn a lot about yourself when you experience those types of things.
Yeah. The thing that I always think about, I read a book called How Bad Do You Want It? And that's the book that I read that kind of like really helped me through the 500. And you don't even have to read the book. How bad do you want it?
Yeah.
How bad do you want this?
Yeah.
Are you willing to go through suffering and pain and, whatever, rain and cold and hunger and whatever? Yeah. I mean, either you are or you aren't. It's that simple. How bad do you want it?
Yeah.
And I don't want it bad enough to where I'm going to put myself in like physical harm.
Right.
But I'm gonna. You
did.
I'm gonna put it close.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it close. I'm gonna. There's something interesting in finding your limits, right? Because when you find a limit that's in your mind, all it is in your mind, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do that because it's gonna hurt, or I can't do that because it's too hard. Yeah. No, that's just in your mind. Then you do that. So that thing that you thought was unattainable that you couldn't do, you do it. Yeah. Now you know you can. Okay, so now you have the perspective of knowing that previously conceived ideas of things that you thought you couldn't do, now you can. Yeah. So what else can you do?
Yeah, it's really
that you think you can't.
Yeah, it's really quite liberating.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding cliche, when you go through that kind of stuff, you really leave behind like a weaker part of you, right? Because when you push and you achieve that new thing, you've kind of left that weaker part behind. Yeah. And it's like, well, I know
I can't be that guy anymore.
Like I beat that. Yeah. So like I know I can go up to the top of the mountain, or I can go that extra mile.
That's a good point.
Now, obviously, all this is done with the understanding of again, the balance between listening to your body and being safe and all that good stuff. So you did the Grand Gravel. That was obviously a very challenging experience and trip, and this trip that you did in White River. What about a favorite trip? Do you have a favorite trip? Was it one of these trips? What would you say to that?
Favorite trip, I think, is a hard question because there's so many different ways that I like to ride my bike. Mm-hmm. There's so many different experiences that I enjoy having that it's hard for me to pinpoint a favorite. Yeah. I was actually asked about this question for the bikepacking.com article. Mm-hmm. It said, describe to me your favorite trip on a bike. Yeah. And I cannot tell you. There was a lot of questions on that interview. That one literally kept me up at night. Like, what is a perfect day on a bike? Yeah. And right after that, my wife and I went on a trip to Sam Houston National Forest. It's 50 minutes from our house. We got in our car, loaded up our bikes, drove to Sam Houston National Forest, and it was an amazing experience. The first night, we were all alone in this campground. The weather was absolutely perfect, which in Texas, you have to just
you got to hit it just right.
There's no mosquitoes. It's cool. There's a nice breeze. The humidity is low. So everything came together. And that night, from probably 9 o'clock at night to midnight, the fireflies were illuminating all the trees around us. Mm-hmm. And in Sam Houston National Forest, it's loblolly pines. Mm-hmm. So, 150 foot tall pine trees and thousands upon thousands. Everywhere you look, 360 degrees around you, there's fireflies, and they're twinkling. Yeah. I mean, they're just putting on a show. And so we just sat there in awe. I mean, this is all happening for us right now. And if we weren't here, if we were in our house watching TV or whatever, we wouldn't get this. This is for us right now. Next morning, we woke up and we rode to a lake that is very, very remote, that very few people know about, and it's beautiful. And we set up our hammocks in between two loblolly pines and had this beautiful lake to ourselves and watched the sun set and watched it glisten off the lake. And I mean, I don't know. That I said in the article, that was perfect. Mm-hmm. I've had so many perfect trips. I could go to Big Bend State Park and the trip I just had with Jared Foster. It was different, but it was perfect. And it's very hard to quantify my favorite. For me, I've just learned that I love riding my bike. I love experiencing this world on a bike, and I like learning about myself on a bike. You know, like we were talking about pushing ourselves and finding out where our limits are. I enjoy that, and I enjoy learning more about this earth. I enjoy learning about the bugs and the flora and fauna and the sunsets, and just soaking all those things in. You know, I just love it all. I mean, I can't pick a favorite. I've had so many good experiences on a bike that they're all good. Yeah.
Well, so that kind of begs the question, what's your least favorite thing about being on a bike? I mean, I know given that answer you just gave, you know, being all positive, maybe that's a difficult thing to answer, but, you know, do you have, well, you know, what's your least favorite thing about, you know, these trips, being on the bike?
Man, that's a tough one, you know. It's tough because if you go into any experience with the understanding and the belief that even a negative experience is a learning experience, then it can't be bad, right? Like, I've done so many trips where things have gone wrong, or the weather wasn't right. You and I, you know, a perfect example is when you and I, after years and years and years, finally got the opportunity to go out to Big Bend Ranch State Park, and we you put together a great route, and we went out there with the highest of hopes, and the weather didn't give us anything to work with. I mean, it was the worst possible. I mean, we're talking about wind, cold, rain, freezing temperatures, snow, sleet, ice, everything. And so I could look on that experience and be like, oh, that was terrible. Or I could look on that experience and be like, no, that was awesome. Yeah. That was Big Ben flexing whatever that was, you know. And I was there, and the trip didn't go the way we wanted it to go. Yeah. But I look back on that trip with very fond memories. It became very much different than what we wanted it to be. We were mostly in our car, and we were checking out Big Ben, but we were seeing a side of it that we didn't expect to see, and I will probably never see again. Yeah. Full disclosure, Ryan was a former park ranger there, so he may have seen all this before.
I never tire of it, though.
No, but you know, so I'm very hesitant to be like, oh, that was a bad trip or anything, because I can find it's just my personality. I'm an optimist.
That's a good thing.
You know, I mean, you can look at any situation and find something shitty about it or something good, and I just tend to always find the good in whatever, because why not?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I think we talked about this at length after our trip. You know, like as you said, you know, we've been planning this trip since 2016, 2015, one of the two, and you know, all this planning, all this prepping, and we went out there and we hardly rode our bikes. I mean, just to be completely honest.
14 miles. I think we got 14 miles.
Yeah, we rode, you know, if that much. But it was such an awesome trip. You know, a lot of other things happened on that trip that we won't get into here, but it just ended up being a really phenomenal trip. And so I applaud you for, you know, having that attitude about, you know, I guess just life in general, but especially these trips, because, you know, it's probably worth noting, especially for people that aren't experienced in bike packing, is that you're going to go on trips where things just don't go the way you imagine them. In fact, most trips you go on probably aren't going to go as planned. And so it's good to kind of have that attitude.
I think that's a really good point. To give a shout out to another podcast I listen to, I think it's the Adventure Sports Podcast. The host there has a saying, if you go seeking adventure, don't be upset when adventure finds you.
Yeah, that's
you know,
good. Yeah.
And that's good, because if you're going to go into any of these scenarios, there's very little that you can control. Like, you can have all your gear and you can be dialed in and be very prepared and know the route, but weather or there's a number of things that can happen.
Yeah.
But accept it, and remember that, at least for me and for you, it's like, we went to Big Bend to experience Big Bend. We wanted to be there on our bikes. We wanted to feel the gravel. We wanted to carry our gear. We wanted to camp under the stars and all those things. But we didn't prepare for that weather. Like, we looked at the weather report and it was supposed to be nice. Like, the weather was supposed to be good.
It's like sunny and 55 degrees.
The day before we got there, it was good. And the day after we left, it was good. But the 3 or 4 days we were there it was a winter wonderland, I guess.
Man,
and
it was terrible.
a winter terror land.
Yeah.
But God, it was beautiful, man.
It
I'll never forget the way the cactus, all the different cacti looked with ice.
Yeah.
Do you remember after coming out of Los Alamos that second day, and we got to the ridge, and you could see at the top of this ridge where all the cactus only had ice on one side of it,
where the
because
wind was blowing.
the wind had blown it so hard that on the other side there was nothing, but on one side it was all ice. And you look at all this, the plants that are there, and you're like, holy shit, you live a rough life, like, it's hot as you can get, and then it's cold as you can get, and you just I don't know, you just respect the land so much. So we could be bummed we didn't ride our bikes, or we can be like, holy shit, this was cool.
Yeah, that was a really fantastic morning when we woke up and saw all that. I remember seeing the cane cholla cactuses that had icicles that were horizontal from the wind, that they were a good 6 or 8 inches long, icicles just flying off these cactus.
See,
really
I'm so grateful that we got to see that.
Yeah.
We didn't get to ride our bikes as much, but if the weather was great, we never would have seen that. We never would have seen what the weather is capable of. And you gotta, if you're gonna go do these things, you have to be respectful of your environment and the weather, and you have to. That's part of it. Like, we're all small and insignificant in a way, and we're all subject to our environment and the weather.
Yeah,
that's it, right? And so you can't make it an enemy.
Yeah,
you just kind of have to roll with it, because it's in charge, and you're just along for the ride.
Yep.
You
just got to manage.
You just got to manage it. Yeah.
So, where do you draw your inspiration from? Where do you draw your inspiration from when you're going on these trips? When you're, planning something? Where do you get your inspiration from?
It would be difficult to pinpoint like a single person. Part of it is internal. Part of it is just who I am. I want to learn more about myself, and I want to learn more about this environment, this world. I want to experience it. For whatever reason, I have that drive and I have that passion, and that's important to me. But when I'm riding and things get hard, I really don't know. I think the honest answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I've gained so much inspiration from other people, seeing what other people are capable of and seeing the places that they go. And I realize that it's possible, and I want that.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be capable. I want to be able to put everything I need on my bike or my back, and I want to go out into the most remote areas and have the most amazing experiences that are just for me. Just like the fireflies in Sam Houston National Forest. Like, you don't just get those experiences, you have to earn them. And when you earn them, they mean so much.
Yeah.
And so whatever that is, that's what pushes me.
Yeah.
It pushes me to, I'll tell you, another similar experience that I had just in Big Bend Ranch State Park. So after our trip, 3 months later, I got a chance to go back with Jared Foster and Texas Tech, and it was a tough trip. I mean, you're in the desert and you're carrying a bunch of weight, and the route is hard and it's hot and everything, and there's cactus everywhere, and it's hard. It's gnarly. But more to the point, day 3 we rode Solitario, which you'll know is an old volcano site. It's 6 miles in diameter. Am I right about this?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit bigger. I think it's like 9 miles. Okay. But you're right. Yeah, it's a monolith.
So why don't you say what the Solitario Loop is, and then I'll.
So the Solitario is a geologic formation in Big Bend Ranch State Park. It's a what's called a laccolith caldera. So it's essentially an uplifted volcanic formation that collapsed.
Yeah.
And so it was a dome that, again, collapsed, and over time it weathered, and it essentially, long story short, it looks like a big crater.
Right.
Is what it looks like now. And so being that Big Bend Ranch State Park was a series of ranches before the state owned it, there's a whole bunch of ranching infrastructure, namely roads. So there's old Jeep roads and stuff that are all throughout the park. And there's a series of roads that go in and out of that formation that's called the Solitario, which is Spanish for hermit or solitary. So and y'all rode at least part of that.
We rode the whole thing.
The whole thing, okay.
Yeah. 25 miles loop,
okay.
the inner loop of the Solitario.
Okay. Yeah.
And am I correct that that's the most remote area of the park?
I guess it depends on how you
access by trail.
Yeah. I mean, that has roads. It's definitely up there. I mean, the whole park is so remote. I mean, from what you can get to on a road or trail, it's probably one of the more remote spots for sure.
So for whatever reason, that third day on the trip, I overextended myself, and I got dehydrated and heat exhaustion and everything else. And at the end of day 3, I was really struggling. I got back to camp and I was in a bad way. It was another one of those times where I was like, okay. And I felt like I knew what I needed. I was dehydrated. I was lack of fuel. So I sat down and had to swallow my pride and ask for help. Whoever was walking by, I'm like, can you grab me some food? Can you grab me some water? I don't care what it is. I just need to put fuel and water back in my body. And I went into this trip kind of like as a leader, I mean, so I really had to swallow my pride a little bit, but I mean, you do what you do. And I sat there for a good hour, just whatever anyone brought me, and they were all great. And they brought me lots of food and water, and I just sat there with my head down and collected myself, and I got through it. And next morning I woke up and I wasn't great. I could tell I was still suffering a little bit, but went on the journey. And throughout the day I got stronger and stronger. And it was a tough day, a lot of climbing that day. But the end of the day, we ended at Choro Vista, which And Choro Vista, well, shit, you tell them what Choro Vista is.
So Choro Vista is a part of the park. It's a campsite is where y'all went. It's kind of a spot that's like in the kind of southern central part of the park. It's just south of the Sauceda Ranger Station, and it's, I guess, really it's just a great overlook spot in the park that you're overlooking Fresno Canyon, Choro Canyon. You're looking into Mexico. You're looking at Sierra Rica and northern Mexico. You can see the Chisos of Big Bend National Park. I mean, so it's just a really, really phenomenal.
How many miles? I was actually talking to my daughter about this just yesterday. How many miles can you see from that vantage point? Like, do you think?
I
50?
Don't. I really don't know the answer to that, but I know that, and I might be wrong on this, but as the crow flies, like from that spot to the Chisos Basin in the national park, I mean, again, as the crow flies, it's not that far. I mean, it's, maybe 20 20 or 30 miles. Like, it's not that
Still
far.
pretty far.
Yeah. But it looks like a world away, when you're up there. I mean, it looks like the other side of the universe,
Yeah. So end of day 4, we get to Churro Vista, and we hike to a peak, probably the highest peak, and you can see for 20 or 25 miles, and you see all the layers. And we were treated to the most magnificent sunset I have ever seen and probably will ever see.
Yeah.
You just cannot describe to people what a sunset looks like when you can see for 20 to 25 miles an hour, or 20 to 25 miles in every single direction. Yeah. You look up, you look down, you look sideways, and everywhere you look, the sky is blazed with, I mean, it's undescribable.
Yeah.
My point is, that moment is etched in my life forever, partially because of the 3 to 4 days before it that I worked so hard to get there.
Yeah.
And everybody else that I was with. I'm going to be releasing a podcast on that one soon. But those kids, I say kids, or college students, were with me. I mean, we were sitting here watching it, and they were crying. I would look over, and people were crying. They were in tears.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and then I would, later on, I got the opportunity to interview some of them, and that one night changed their life, literally.
Yeah.
Changed the way that they wanted to live their life, the types of kids that they wanted to raise, what they wanted to do with their time on this earth, how they wanted to spend it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing to see that.
Yeah.
And I don't got off on a tangent, but
no, I think you're right on point.
But the point is, like, when you just have to go out there and ride your bike and get to those spots. And if you're willing to put in the work, it's there for you. It's waiting for you. If you are willing to go and put yourself through dehydration and starvation and altitude sickness and whatever else, like, if you're willing to do that, you're going to be treated to some of the most spectacular things you've ever seen, and they're going to be more meaningful to you. Because you and I both know that you can take a Jeep and you can drive up to Churro Vista.
But it's not the same.
I'm just going to leave it at that. You can do that.
It's not the same.
Or you can ride your bike. And you can earn it. And you're gonna sit there and you're gonna weep. You're gonna be so grateful for that experience, because it's gonna mean so much more because of the effort that you put in to get there.
That's profound. So let's talk about the podcast, and let's talk about Bikes or Death.
Oh, good. Let's lighten it up.
So here's a big question for you. So what is Bikes or Death? So I think most of the people out there that are following you and the podcast, we know the name of the show is Bikes or Death, but, we kind of get the impression that Bikes or Death is more than just, the podcast, so, what is this creation, of yours, Bikes or Death?
Oh, wow. You're asking that question as if I know the answer. Truth time. Okay. So I started an Instagram account called Fargo Felina, which is, the name of my Fargo is Felina. And it was an outlet for me to be as bike nerdy as I want to be. Like, I can post as many pictures of my bike. I can talk about all the stupid shit that I'm doing with my bike that, like, my other Instagram account and my Facebook account don't care about, and I started doing that, and people started to, like, I was like, okay, people are, like, interested in my nerdy bike, account. And, I mean, so, like, the whole thing truthfully happened on accident. Like, I started an Instagram account that was just for me to be a bike nerd. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted a forum for me to post pictures about my bike and connect with other bike nerds. Yeah. Truthfully, like that's all I wanted to do. Separately from that, one of my buddies, Brian, and I, we are huge podcast nerds. We listen to podcasts all the time, and he and I are very different, but we have a great rapport. And so we'll get to drinking and we have these really interesting conversations. And at some point along the way, we were like, hey, let's start our own podcast, and it was just one of those things you talk about when you're drunk, you're like, oh, drunk. You're like, oh, let's start a podcast, you know? Yeah. But we started getting drunk and having the podcast talk more regularly. So then the podcast talk morphed into our non-drunk conversations. And it just kind of, it evolved into the point where he and I actually like, okay, are we really doing this? Like, are we just talking shit or are we going to start a podcast? Yeah. And we decided we were going to start a podcast. And anyway, long story short, he and I didn't work out, and it doesn't really matter why, but while he and I were doing that, I had this Instagram account going and I had this audio equipment, and I was like, okay, Brian and I were going to do a podcast, but on the side, just for fun, just to like feed that bike nerd inside me, I'm going to start a bike podcast. I don't know exactly what it's going to be about, but I'm just going to get on my mic and I'm going to talk about bikes. I'm going to talk to other bike nerds, and that's it. So when that podcast didn't work out with him, I was like, okay, well, I got all the equipment. I still want to do a podcast. I was still fired up for the idea of a podcast. And I just went to the thing that was closest to home, which was bikes. Yeah. It's something I can talk about to anybody. I'm passionate about it. I'm interested in it. I love it. So, okay. Then I get on Apple Podcasts and I'm like, I start looking at all the different bike packing podcasts. I'm like, all right, well, there's not much here. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just start one, know? And so how Bikes or Death was formed was like, it was just a convergence of a lot of different things going on in my life. Like, it wasn't intentional. I didn't set out to start a bike packing podcast, so to speak. I had a Instagram outlet that I was enjoying where I was talking about bikes, and I had this passion to want to create a podcast and just do it for fun. And so then I literally just got an Instagram and started looking at different names that were available, and if you want to have anything in this world, you have to like have an Instagram account, like, and it can't just be Patrick777, so I went through a huge list of names and finally came across Bikes or Death that was available. And the Instagram account was available and the domain was available. And I was like, holy shit, how is this, because it's basically ride or die, right? Ride or die, Bikes or Death. It's basically the same thing, but different words. And I couldn't believe that no one else had scooped either one of them up. And so I scooped both of them up, and that was kind of how it started. I was like, okay, I got the equipment. I got a name. I got an Instagram account. Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you formed a podcast, and, I feel like it's taken off pretty quickly. You've had about, I guess, seven guests total. This will be the 8th.
I'm number 8.
This will be the 8th recording.
If I ever release it.
Yeah. Yeah, you should. So at this point, do you have a vision for the show? I mean, what was your vision then, and what is it now? And
yeah, that's a great question. The truth is that when I started the podcast, I had zero vision other than to have fun. have fun, talk about bikes, talk to people that I think are interesting. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, like I have an insatiable curiosity. That's one thing that I think lends to me being a good podcaster, a good host, is that I could talk to almost anybody and find interest in whatever story. Like, I mean, if you dig deep enough, everybody has an interesting story.
Yeah.
Sitting here right now, I still don't know. That's the truth. I don't know what I want it to be. I don't have any elaborate goals or aspirations. I genuinely love bikes, bike packing. I enjoy talking to people, and I'm finding that there are people out there who are very eager to learn about this activity or this sport that I'm passionate about. And there just doesn't happen to be a lot of people talking about it. So I'm happy to fill that void to whatever extent that I can.
Yeah.
As I've done this, it's forced me to kind of think more about myself and my own positions on whatever it is, right? If you're going to be talking to people, it's good to have ideas that are your own. So it forces you to consider those things. And I realized not too long ago that, you know, promoting bikes and being a cyclist is just who I am. When I was 14 years old, so I grew up, I was a Boy Scout, Cub Scout, Boy Scout, and I am an Eagle Scout. For my Eagle Scout project, if you don't know, to become an Eagle Scout, you have to do a project, and it has to be like 100 hours of community service, and there's all these requirements. My Eagle Scout project was a bicycle rodeo. So this was my idea, and I completely created the entire thing. What it was it was 3 parts. It was Aguilan Cycling, which is still my local bicycle shop. It's where I bought my first bike, or my parents bought my first bike ever, and I'm still a customer of theirs. They came out and they did bicycle maintenance. We had the police officers that came out there, and they taught about bicycle safety and bike laws and how to signal on a bike and all that stuff. And we did a bike rodeo, which is where there's cones and stop signs and all those things. So you take what you've learned and then you demonstrate it on an obstacle course kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had to go to local radio stations and promote it. And so I was like, at 14 years old, I was like on a local radio station, like talking about, you know, this bicycle rodeo that I did in a Walmart parking lot. And I had to go to Walmart and ask them for permission.
It's come full circle.
Yeah, it has, man. That's what I'm saying. It's like, I think that I've realized that I didn't mean for it to happen. You know, it's just like, it's just who I am. And through who I am and being me, like, this podcast has just become the next step in my progression as being me. You know, I feel like I have a decent ability to talk to people. I'm extremely curious. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, I could sit here and talk to anybody one-on-one for hours upon hours and really dig down on who they are and why they do what they do and legitimately be interested in that. Yeah.
So on that note, I mean, for the show, how do you decide, you know, who you want to pursue as a guest?
That's fairly easy in that, okay, here's how it works. Let me tell you about my first guest, Greg Hardy with Rockgeist. So my wife, again, Carrie, like, I feel like every trip we take is because Carrie knows somebody who's in a wedding. And so it was last September. We were going to Asheville, North Carolina for one of her friend's wedding. And it was around the same time we were talking about where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a podcast. I have all the equipment. This is my first opportunity. I'm going on a trip. Who am I going to interview? So I get on the internet, start Googling everybody that's in Asheville, North Carolina. Turns out Rottgeist is there, Greg Hardy, and I had previously purchased a bag from him, and I forgot or didn't know that he was based out of Asheville, North Carolina. And so I just sent him an Instagram message, and I was like, hey, I'm headed up here these dates. Would you be interested in doing a podcast? I've never done a podcast in my life. I'm just some random guy that says I'm a podcaster, and I'm like, hey, let's do a podcast. He responds like 7 minutes or something. Like, he responds pretty quickly. He's like, yeah, I'd be totally down to do that. Just like real nonchalant. So and I'll be honest, like that moment when he like messaged me back and was like, yes, I was like, oh shit. Like, now I have to, I can't like get out of it. Like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so that's a good example of like how my podcast has happened. Like, my second guest was Billy Rice. He's here locally. And then Jared Foster, he posted on Facebook, Texas Bikepacking, about a trip that he was doing. And so I just reached out to him organically. And then that's just kind of the way it's happened. Like, I see something that's in my vicinity or somewhere I'm going, and I try to fit it in my life organically. Like, I'm not the podcast is very much a hobby for me, especially at that point. And even now, like, it's something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy talking to people. And so if I'm going somewhere, I will reach out to somebody in the area and I will say, hey, let's do a podcast. I said earlier in the show that this next weekend we're heading up to Northwest Arkansas. And so I have 2 people lined up to interview there. I know I'm going there, so I've researched and identified people that would be good guests, and I'm going to talk to them while I'm there. That's it. So I'm going to go have a vacation and talk to people about bikes. That's it. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think, in my opinion, one of the things that makes this show kind of what it is, and one of the things that's drawn me to it, is that you don't have to be like a famous person in the industry, or you don't have to be a bag maker, or a frame builder, or you don't have to be a big name in the cycling industry. You're just interested in hearing people's stories, whether they are again, somebody that's well known, or they're just somebody off the street. So for me as a listener and your friend, I think that's one of the things that's really cool for me. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that, actually. And I'm glad you brought it up. I don't give a shit who you are, to be honest. Every single person who is interested in the sport, or a top level athlete, or a big manufacturer, or whatever it is, everybody has a story, and all of them are valuable.
Yeah.
I'm a perfect example of that. I've only been bikepacking for 2 years, 39 years old. Only 2 years of it has been spent bikepacking.
Yeah.
I'm very much a beginner bikepacker, I still think,
Yeah.
And so I'm hosting a show about bikepacking, and the only thing that I have to my credit is that I'm curious. And so I can sit across somebody and be like, okay, what do you know? What can you contribute?
Yeah.
And the most questions that I get are from beginner bikepackers. Like, what do you do? How do you do this? Or whatever it is. Like, I get so many questions from people who are just starting. And so it doesn't matter if like you're, super experienced or just getting started. Those experiences are valuable. And above biking and bikepacking and all that, we're all humans, and humans are awesome. Like, let's get to know each other, and let's spread that story, whatever it is. Like, I don't know. I like people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I like about the show a lot, is that it's very much based in other people's experiences, and not so much, the finer details about a bike or a trip necessarily, which you do get into that, which is great, but it's very heavily focused on, the people and the experiences that they have on their trips or in their business or, their lives as it relates to biking. So I think that's as a listener, that's something for me that makes it special. And I think, and I hope other people recognize that. And I know that, I listen to a lot of other podcasts. I try to, when I can. And there's kind of a disconnect between the listener and the podcaster with a lot of shows, in that, a lot of people, they interview like famous people, or they interview people that are, well known, or they are accomplished in some way. And so I think it's really cool when you have people like Chris on the show, who was just here, I guess 2 episodes ago or whenever
sitting
that was.
In the chair you're sitting in right now.
Yeah, and he's literally a guy off the street. He's not, a big name.
The longest ride he ever did before riding across America was 200 miles.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
200 miles. He did a 200-mile ride, and then he was like, you know what? I'm going to ride from California to Florida.
Yeah.
Tell me that's not cool.
Yeah. So it's just stuff like that. It's just really neat that you'll have just people on the show that are willing to share their experiences. And I think it makes it really relatable. And I think, I commend you for that. I think that's very cool.
Well, thank you. I mean, part of it is, I want to be very clear. I am pretty inexperienced, like the reason why that I can sit down with somebody like Chris and be amazed by his story is because he's doing something I've never done before.
Yeah.
Something that I sit back and I'm in awe of him. I've done a 500-mile ride, whatever you want to call it. And I still look at what he's doing and I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, 1, it's a hard task, but 2, how do you get off the time from work? Like, how do you carve off time out of your life to make that a reality? And how cool is it that he made that a priority? Like he quit his job so he could go and do this. He was like, this is something I need to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there is a lot of value in the humility that you show, because I think you're kind of downplaying. I mean, you are an accomplished cyclist and you're an avid outdoorsman. And I think it's really neat that, you are willing to just hear people's stories and dig into their experience and have them share their experience, regardless of who they are or how experienced they are. I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I just enjoy it. Yeah. I mean, I always have. It's part of my personality where I just, throughout my life, I've always, what I enjoy? I enjoy one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
If you put me one-on-one with somebody, I become very interested in who you are and your story. And I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but I enjoy it.
I think it shows. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So what would make you step back and look at Bikes or Death and say, this is successful?
That's a really hard question, considering the fact that I just had bikepacking.com feature myself in the show on their website. I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge nod to how important that is to me, just me. If you can imagine, myself as a kid and a kid growing up in cycling and then loving riding bikes and then finding out about bike packing and spending hours upon hours upon hours. I mean, neglecting life to research everything that is on bikepacking.com. Mm-hmm. And it's still surreal. I mean, this happened 5 days ago. As we're talking, I look up to those people on that website as inspiration. I mean, those are the people who actually caused me to want to do a podcast. I want to go back to a question that you asked earlier about, how did Bikes or Death become a thing, right? Mm. And I talked about the equipment and, me being a bike packer and all those things. But the one thing that I failed to mention is that, and I think it's the most important thing, something was stirring inside of me that wanted to give back to the cycling community on some level, whether it was the local or national or whatever. Like, there's so many people who have done so much on every level, and bikepacking.com is a perfect example of that. If you ever want to know anything about bikepacking, you go there first.
Yeah.
Whether it's equipment or routes or stories, inspiration, all those things, you go there first. You just do. I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And because of that, you think about this life and you're like, okay, what am I doing? I'm working a job and I'm providing for my family and I'm enjoying life, but what am I going to leave behind? Like, what am I doing to help humanity, the world, whatever,
Yeah.
And I'm 39 years old. Like, I just got to this point in my life where I'm like, I want to give something back, and I want to give something back to cycling. I want to do something for the cycling community. And a lot of that is because of bikepacking.com. Like, all the contributions that have been made, all the people who have gone out and found and pioneered routes and tested gear and whatever it is. Like, there's so many people that have done so many things that I've been a benefactor of.
Yeah.
Like, I've used all that information, I've taken it, and I've gone out and I've done great things for myself. And as I've done that, as I've gone out and I've explored and I've taken that information and I've ran with it and I've really bettered my life. Like, I feel like my life is better because of all those people who have done all those things. That's like the real reason. It's like, yes, things came together in an interesting way, but I was already looking for an opportunity to give back to this community, and I didn't have any grandiose plans that Bikes or Death would be like a big contribution, and I still don't necessarily think that. But why not? I mean, I got equipment, I got curiosity, I can talk to people. Let's do it. Let's do a podcast. Let's throw something out there. Let's give back to this community. And so, what was your question? How will I know when I made it?
No. I mean, just when you step back and look at Bikes or Death, what would you say has made it successful? Or
I think I'm already there. Honestly, I've been humbled and overwhelmed by the people that I hear from on a daily basis. Genuinely, I mean, I'm just a guy that enjoys riding bikes. I'm a normal guy. I've done some cool trips. I've had some fun stuff, but I mean, there's way more experienced people than I am. There's way more accomplished people than who I am. But I mean, I get messages all the time from people, whether it's in America or Europe or New Zealand or Ireland or wherever, saying just the most amazing things about the show and about the guest and about me. And I mean, what else could you ask for? I mean, if I'm being honest, like, I'm very, very touched to be in a position. If you think back to that 14-year-old me, did a bicycle rodeo for his community to try to teach younger kids about bikes and bike safety and bike maintenance. And, now as an adult with kids, trying to share the love of cycling and bike packing and the outdoors to the world, and having people respond to that in a positive way. I mean, if it stopped tomorrow, I'd be super happy.
Yeah.
I couldn't ask for anything more.
Well, man, that's all really great stuff. And, again, as a listener and, as a friend of yours, I really appreciate what you're doing on this podcast. And I really enjoy, listening to you talk with people and kind of getting an understanding of people's experiences. And I think it's a fantastic way to give back to the community, because there's no shortage of gear review websites. Mm-hmm. There's no shortage of, pictures of bikes, which is all fine. That's good. That's good stuff. I love looking at pictures of bikes. Don't get me wrong. But there's no shortage of all these things. And so I think you're definitely kind of filling in a part of the cycling community that might not necessarily be there in this medium. And I think it's really cool to kind of get an understanding of the people who make up this sport. And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think that Bikes or Death is doing that. I think it's that's kind of what I see as what it's doing for the community, and I think that's really awesome. And I applaud you for the work that you've done so far. And
well, thank
congratulations on that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I would be remiss if I also didn't give you some credit, because I feel like a lot of my positions, not only in life but on bikes, come from conversations that you and I have. Like we're constantly, figuring out why we do what we do and what we're getting out of it and how we can be better and whatever it is. Like our conversations have really helped informed a lot of the opinions that I have, and people should know that, like, whenever I'm on this show and I say something, a lot of it is because of a conversation you and I had, but I do think that, like, I think you're 100% right. Like, someone has already done all the gear reviews. Mm-hmm. You can go on YouTube. You can find so much information, whether it's bikepacking.com or YouTube or Instagram, or, I mean, if you want to find out about gear is out there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's not my strength. I'm not that great about gear. Like, I like the gear that I have, and that's great. Like, it's functional, but for me, it's much more about the experience. Like, I want to be the guy. Like, if I want to be anything, I want to be the guy that's, like, helping to share the bike packing stoke and helping to get people out to explore this great world that we live in and interact with it on a real level, And so it's not that there's anything wrong with all those things. It's just that I feel like that's been done. And I also feel like I'm not experienced or qualified enough to be the guy that's like, well, you should get this frame over that frame, or this bag over that bag, or whatever it is. Like, I don't have enough experience to feel like I can add something to that conversation.
Yeah.
But what I think that I can do is talk to people and share other people's experiences. And through that, other people will be able to learn and benefit from that. So I think that's, like, probably the biggest goal of the podcast. Like, as I've gone on, I think I've realized that that's what I want to do. I want to share your story. Like, I could sit here and ask you a million questions. What did you learn? How'd you do it? Why did you do it? What'd you learn from it? And like, through that, someone's going to learn from that, because someone hasn't done that before. That experience you had is special. It's different. It's unique. And it's there's a purpose there. There's something that can be gained from that. And that's what I want to really try to tap into is everybody's unique experience, because it's unique.
Yeah.
No one's going to have that. I keep referencing it, but no one's going to have that night that Carrie and I had in Sam Houston National Forest, when thousands upon thousands of fireflies were putting on a show just for us, or Chorro Vista Night 4 at Big Bend Ranch State Park, when the sun set just blew up the sky. Those are experiences that I can share, and inspire other people to go out there and find those experiences for yourself.
Yeah.
And that hits closer to home for me,
Yeah. Well, I think you're definitely achieving that, and I think you're doing a great job at it.
Thank you.
So if people want to find out more about you or Bikes or Death, or maybe they want to ask you more questions, what's a good way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is just through Instagram, honestly. Life is complicated. Life is busy. And I could do a blog and I could do YouTube and I could do so many different things. But the truth of it is that I live a very busy life, and I can only commit myself to, certain things. And like Instagram has become a great tool for me. I generate a lot of inspiration. I love following Instagram when I'm not on an adventure. It gives me stoke about finding cool places or following other people that are out there doing something that I want to be doing. So I'm on there a lot, probably more than I should be. And anyway, message me on there. And I would like to say that do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. I'm just a regular guy. I like talking about bikes. And if you reach out to me, I'm like, sometimes like I'm responding to people. I'm like, I'll write them a book. They send me, ask me a question. I'm like, I go into like grave detail and like respond to them, but I enjoy it. I mean, the only reason I'm sitting here doing this, talking to people about bikes is because I enjoy it. I want people to be excited about riding bikes and going out and exploring this cool earth that we live on. That's it, so reach out to me.
Yeah. All good stuff, man. Well, Patrick, thanks for coming on your show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, everybody. This has been Bikes or Death. Go ride your bike.
All right, everyone. Patrick here. I'm back on the mic, or back on this side of the mic. And just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed that more than I did. I have to say that I enjoy being the interviewer more than the interviewee. But that's okay. I'm happy to put that out there, and I hope y'all enjoy it. And big thanks to Ryan for taking the time to put together a list of questions and coming over here and putting me on the spotlight. I went into this blind. I prefer that the conversations be more like organic and natural, and so that's typically the way I like to do it. And so if I can, if my guests are okay with it, I don't provide them with my questions either, so it's one of those things where you listen back, you're like, oh, I should have said this, and that was dumb, and I made a mistake there. But you know what? We're all human, and I definitely make mistakes, and I say stupid things. So it is what it is. So, let's not take ourselves too seriously, right? Okay, little bit of housekeeping. I appreciate so many of you who have gone on to Patreon over the last couple weeks. I've got I don't even remember, 10 or 11 new Patreons, and that's freaking awesome. I genuinely appreciate it, whether it's $1 or $5 or 10 or whatever it is. It means the world to me. I would love for this to be a community supported project where you see the value in it and you want to support it. And it means a lot, if you put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And, so I'll remind everyone I'm running a promotion over on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can get on and sign up there, and I will send you a sticker for $1. That's it. I'll probably send you more than a sticker. Usually I throw a few in there. So you can share them with your buddies. All right. Yeah. So let's keep that going. Keep the Patreon stoke alive. And if you want to keep up with me in the show, you can find me at Bikes for Death on Instagram or Facebook. All right. That's it. Now you know what to do. Go ride your damn bike.